Good morning, or for those joining us from the Middle East, Europe, or elsewhere around the globe, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jonathan Panikoff, Director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. It's my privilege to welcome you for today's discussion on the launch of the new book, The Man Who Would Be King, Mohammed bin Salman and the Transformation of Saudi Arabia, written by our featured speaker today, Karen Elliott House. In her new book, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and former publisher and managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, Karen Elliott House draws on nearly 5 decades of covering the kingdom and unique access to the Crown Prince himself. Over her 32-year career, Karen served as foreign editor, diplomatic correspondent, energy correspondent, and won the Pulitzer Prize in 1984 for her coverage of the Middle East. Her 2013 book, On Saudi Arabia, Its People, Past, Religion, Fault Lines, and Future, has long been a mandatory read for those wanting to understand the kingdom. Today's conversation comes at a pivotal moment for Saudi Arabia and the broader Middle East. As the region undergoes sweeping political, economic, and social changes, no figure has reshaped Saudi Arabia's trajectory more than its current crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The Man Who Would Be King, which is currently the #1 book for new releases in the Middle East politics on Amazon, is, in my humble opinion, the most insightful and nuanced portrait of the Crown Prince and seeks to unpack the varied dimensions of his leadership, goals, and high-stakes implications for the kingdom and the broader region. It provides readers a portrait of a leader simultaneously driving major reforms in the kingdom while consolidating unprecedented power. It discusses his impact on Saudi society, his relationship with youth, and his ambitions to position the kingdom among the world's top economies. As we look ahead to key milestones from Vision 2030 to Saudi Arabia's G20 presidency next year, understanding MBS's vision, strategy, and long-term goals is more important than ever. As today's conversation continues, we invite you to submit your questions throughout the time via askac.org, which you'll find it linked in the chat below. To moderate today's discussion, I'm delighted to introduce Vivian Nadim, the Gulf Bureau Chief for the New York Times and the longest-serving foreign correspondent in Saudi Arabia. Vivian has reported from Riyadh since 2015 and brings a rare depth of insight on the kingdom's internal dynamics, policymaking, and societal shifts. With that, I'll turn it over to Vivian to guide today's discussion. Vivian, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to everyone who is joining us today. Karen, why don't we just jump right in? I was wondering if you could start by telling us why you wanted to write this book and what sort of made it come about after your previous book on Saudi Arabia about 10 years ago.
After that first book, I kept going back to the kingdom just to keep in touch with what was changing. And in 2015, King Abdullah died and King Salman came to power and brought his son, who initially had no title. He wasn't deputy or crown prince. He was just his father's man, and he was transforming the way the government was organized. So I got to meet him in 2016, and he was, to me, shockingly un-Saudi. I had actually met him once in 2010 when I interviewed his father, but he didn't talk at that time. The son didn't. So once I got to meet him, I was intrigued. And then after he announced Vision 2030, I was really interested in who is this guy other than the sixth son of King Salman, and where did he get these ideas, and why is he so, in my view, atypical Saudi? Most Saudis want to blend in, to not to bring shame on the family, to make sure that everything is harmonious. and he likes to stick out. He's perfectly happy to be different and to be driven and dynamic and determined and dictatorial at times. So I then asked him, would you talk to me? I would like to explain who you are, that right now your picture is on every building in Riyadh, in every hotel, but you're fundamentally a cardboard cutout. No one really knows what shaped you. How did you get this role in a hierarchical society? The sixth son should amount to very little. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, but he kept seeing me. And so over time, I think he and the Royal Court Press Office got comfortable with the idea of having me write about him. And so I said, I can't write about him if you don't put all these interviews on the record. So they did. And in 2023, I got a book contract and wrote the book.
So you met MBS, several times for this book. One of the questions that I get asked most often, and I'm interested to hear your answer, is, what is he like face to face? What do you think you can learn about him sort of from meeting him in person?
Mhm. Uh, I would be interested in how you would answer your own question. But for me, what was so surprising was just how un, um, unroyal, unassuming he was. He walked into his office, he shook hands, his head was bare, he had on a traditional thobe, but no bisht. He wasn't trying to look regal. He sits down, motions me to sit down, and then you ask him questions and he answers. And he's extremely self-confident, extremely forthcoming. And one of my conversations with him in 2023, he told me that he was going to restore diplomatic relations with Iran before it was published and it was off the record. And, my jaw dropped and I said, why? And he said, why now? And he said, in essence, that the U.S. is not reliably going to protect us from Iran, so we have to improve relations. He's happy to explain himself in private. I mean, the way Trump talks in public all the time, continuous talk, explaining himself. The Crown Prince doesn't do that, but when he has meetings, at least in my experience, you can ask him anything and you can expect an answer. He doesn't say, oh, I don't want to talk about that, or that's none of your business, or, he's happy to answer. And I found that surprising because with his elderly uncles that I had met in the past, or his dad, Prince Salman, or Prince Ahmed, or Prince Nayef, or Prince Sultan, you couldn't actually have a conversation because there were so many minders, moving around the room and getting in the way, and the answers sort of came from on high, not straight at you. So I was totally intrigued by how different he was. Is that your experience too? Do you have the same?
Well, I mean, I guess, my experience is slightly different because I don't have that depth of decades prior, meeting other Saudi royals for interviews. I think he was really probably one of the first royals I sat in an interview with. So I don't necessarily have that like contrast or expectation of what he would be. I do think he is very charismatic when he speaks in person. It's clear that he is intelligent. He likes to rattle off numbers very quickly, and he has a good grasp of the numbers that he's sort of watching and keeping an eye on in terms of his economy and investment and all of those things. And I think he, one of the things that struck me is how often he sort of surprised his underlings by kind of making pronouncements or announcements or declarations, and that then, you know, you would leave a meeting and people would scurry after you saying, what was that about? Can you give me those details? You know, so I think he was very, you know, very, like you say, very kind of spontaneous in the way that he spoke. I mean, how did you, you know, over all that time that you were meeting him, from, you know, he's evolved, you know, as a person, as a leader, and quite a lot has changed in Saudi Arabia. How would you say he changed throughout your meetings from, say, the first time you met him in 2016 until more recently?
I don't think there was a huge amount of change. He seemed very confident in that first meeting in 2016, and I saw him another half dozen times, I guess, and you know, mostly for quite lengthy meetings. And you know, he was always self-confident, intelligent, charismatic, not looking over his shoulder for whose permission did he need to say anything. He's, as that ad, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. When MBS talks, people listen. You know, he speaks with authority. So I don't think, I mean, I think he probably is somewhat more reflective now. You know, and that may be partly because he has unleashed all of these changes that he talked about, and he's now trying to make sure that they are properly done or executed. So he's a little more less kind of driven to do the next new thing when you talk to him. He's more focused on, how do we get all of this to work together and work effectively?
And what are some of the things that he told you during your conversation that you found surprising, or that, you know, were things that you didn't expect to hear?
Uh, because he is so self-confident now, I was shocked to hear him. I asked him about, you know, what, in trying to find out what shaped him as a young man. And he said his mother told him, and all of her 6 boys, she was the third wife of Prince, now King Salman, that she told them, don't be also Rands to the 5 boys from the first wife. So he, you know, he always it seemed confident, but he told me once when I said that someone was dignified, he said not dignified, shy, and that he was extremely shy as a boy and was unable to perform in a second grade play at his school, even though he had rehearsed for it, that he just refused. His father was there saying, please, please, you know, you can do this. And he wouldn't do it. I guess an early example of his stubbornness. But he, that surprised me. I would have never taken him for a shy kid. When his friends talked about, you know, he's very competitive. I can certainly see that from just conversations with him, that he likes to stand out. He drove an orange Lamborghini in high school. You know, I can certainly imagine that, but I could not imagine his being a shy boy. Although I guess he still is not eager to do like Trump, constantly be out in public making pronouncements. He's much more judicious about when he is seen in public. I think he meets a lot of people, but he doesn't do a lot of, you know, speaking at the UN, you know, trying to draw attention to himself.
Yeah, and I think you wrote in the book that he crashed that orange Lamborghini.
Yes, he and one of his friends had a wreck in Riyadh, and he said he rushed home because his father was the governor of Riyadh at the time and apparently had a reputation for knowing everything that went on. So he wanted to get the news to his father before the police or whomever got the news to his father. But yes, he crashed it.
That's fascinating to me. Yeah, that was just a very interesting anecdote. One of the other kind of fascinating aspects of the book I thought was MBS discussing his video game habit with you in some sort of detail. And I guess, what sort of role do you think that video games have played in shaping who he is, what type of leader he is? Why do you think they're so important to him?
I think because, he grew up in a time in Saudi Arabia. He was born in 1985, and the religious conservatives, basically the royal family let them take over in all but name in 1980 after the attack on the Mecca Mosque in 79 and the fall of the Shah in Iran. So there was nothing, there was no entertainment in Saudi Arabia. And he says his first video game his mother gave him, and he got hooked, I think, because that was one of the few things he could do with his friends. And those who know him well say that he, in essence, he did so much of that he felt that anything you could do in a video game, you could do in real life, that this is what stretched his mind into the idea that innovation is what's good and incrementalism is what's bad. I quoted in the book Lee Kuan Yew, the famous Singaporean leader who took that country from nothing to basically the highest per capita income in the world. And he said, if you were just realistic, you become pedestrian, plebeian, you will fail. Therefore, you must be able to soar above reality and say, this is not impossible, and do it. And that's really MBS's view, that anything you put your mind to, you can do. And I think that does come from the video game upbringing and the fact that he struggled, so to speak, as a royal. He felt that he was not as prominent as many of his cousins. When King Abdullah declined to give him a promotion that he earned in his first job in government right out of law school, he he really felt that he had been put down, and he wanted again to excel. He put his mind to trying to be useful to King Abdullah, and he says the king did use him to do things other people didn't want to do. He was prepared, as always, to stand out, to do the difficult thing. And he has, I think, worked his way up, and the playing video games is a form of both motivation and relaxation. He says video games stretch your brain, and he says he still plays for half an hour every morning when he gets up. And he told me the story of playing the champion of one of the video games. And, he says he lost 60% of the time, but he won 40% of the time. And he was so proud of himself and pleased for winning. I mean, I don't do video games, so it's not a conversation I can keep up with him on, but he clearly is deeply into it.
Yeah, that was also a very fascinating anecdote to me that it kind of sounded like he had almost summoned, this champion of a video game that he enjoyed to play against him.
Mhm.
I can only imagine the emotions and thoughts going through the head of the person who had been
Mhm. Mhm.
summoned, and then sort
Right.
of how do you play that? Yeah, obviously he doesn't want you to lose to him necessarily, but I imagine that must have been quite
Yeah. How do you
challenging.
play the Crown Prince? It's
Yeah, yeah, that's not an easy position to be in. I mean, I want to read one sentence that definitely caught my eye in the book. It's you describing MBS, and you say, he smiles often and looks one directly in the eye, offering fulsome explanations that always seek to persuade. He is a born marketer. And I guess my question when I was reading that is, when you have this much access or you've managed to negotiate this much access to this incredibly powerful figure, how do you balance that with writing, your own take independently? Or how do you seek to kind of make sense of, how many of the things that he's telling you are realistic and genuine, and how much of it is sort of a narrative intended to persuade?
well, I mean, that's something you have to uh, dissect with every person you ever talk to as a journalist. How much of this is to manipulate me and how much of this is accurate. And, fundamentally, I mean, I wasn't there for his childhood. I talked to his uh, brothers and his ministers, etc., to try to track, cross check things that he says about himself. And, I mean, for instance, the is he shy? As I said, I couldn't imagine that until, I mean, one of the ministers in a different time period said to me, he's a shy person. And I said, oh, he can't be. And he said, yeah, he doesn't, want to get up and give big speeches, etc., which I think is true. I'm not sure that it's a sign that he's shy. But anyway, they did not try to tell me, it's not an authorized biography. They didn't try to tell me you can't write this and you must write that, because I think they know from my umpteen 40 plus years of going there that that's not the way I have operated. And you don't know whether he will find the book, because I raise questions about um, can he do all of this? I mean, his ambition is undeniable. The money is big, but not big enough. They need foreign direct investment, and they're not getting enough of it. They need foreign expertise, and they have to do things to attract people to help them with all of this. Um, so I obviously raise the issue of can he make it all work? Or will this be like, the Shelley poem, Ozymandias, look upon me, you mighty in despair, and Ramses, who was so powerful, and then it's all dust in the desert. And previous big Saudi projects have not worked out well, and he knows that, and he's seeking to do something different, not just build a bunch of big projects, but build a society that is completely different from the one that he inherited, instead of one that's held together by religious pressure. He's trying to create nationalism. I am a proud Saudi. I have the ability to do things and to get the young people to follow him. And so far, they are, um, because he's giving them the entertainment they never had, dancing in the streets and movies and um, soccer and boxing and all of that kind of stuff. Um, so I one is constantly trying to assess, but he is a marketer. He is a salesman. He is trying to convince you that he knows what he's doing and what he's doing is the right thing to do. I don't think it convinces all of his listeners all the time, but he's pretty effective. Like Mr. Mamdani, the socialist would-be mayor in New York, or what Trump calls the communist would-be mayor in New York. You know, he seems to be pretty adept at selling his positions. We'll see whether he gets elected or not. But some people are very persuasive and some are less so. And MBS is probably on the more persuasive side. And power, obviously, is a part of the persuasive glue.
I can't imagine that MBS ever thought he might be compared with Mamdani. That's an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
You write quite a lot in this book, and you've written in the past as well about, these really sweeping social and economic changes that are taking place in Saudi Arabia. And one of the questions I'm always wrestling with is, how much of this change is MBS the main factor behind? How much of it is he responsible for, and how much of it comes back to shifts that were already in motion when he came to power, shifts that are happening bottom up in some ways? How do you untangle that?
Mm-hmm. I think I think his distinctive contribution was to recognize that the society wanted these shifts, and he simply executed on their desire. Because in all the years I was writing that first book, King Abdullah was trying to be a reformer. He wanted to let women have more rights. He wanted, for instance, to let women sell lingerie in department stores. And the religious simply wouldn't have it. And he wanted to let women drive. They wouldn't have it. And he didn't have the courage to simply do it. And so a lot of that first book is about how unhappy young Saudis were. And something like 60% of the population in Saudi Arabia is under 35. So it is a very young society. And that cohort was very unhappy that the royals were doing what they wanted to do and allowing the religious to suppress and starve everyone else of any freedom or entertainment. They knew, thanks to the internet, how people were living in the rest of the world. They would visit Dubai and Bahrain and Europe and understood that the rest of the world had a lifestyle that was denied them. And so when MBS came, what he did, he was one of those, if you will, I think, religiously suppressed youth who wanted more freedom. And so he simply said to the religious police, you cannot come on the street anymore and arrest anyone. And they accepted it. And when the religious clerics tried to complain, he said to me, we're going to allow them to have dialogue with each other, that some of them are extremists. And the ones that wouldn't revert or convert from being extremists, they, in essence, locked up. And some began to recant, and some were more open-minded to start with. So I think what he has done distinctively is have the knowledge to recognize people want change and the guts to just do it. And maybe it doesn't take that much guts when you know people want to do it, but doing it, was not a simple slam dunk, but he got it done.
Yeah, one of the things that's always very interesting to me and that they don't talk very much about publicly is the ways in which sort of the royal court and, Saudi officials try to get a sense of what public opinion is. All
Hmm.
their sort of, quiet polling and various ways that they try to have a finger on the pulse. Why do you think they are so interested in that, given that ultimately they're, an authoritarian government?
Yeah, I think it is fascinating because, we in the West think, that if you're the monarch or the king or the dictator, you can just do what you want to. And um, here we have checks and balances because we get to vote, etc. But I think they do want to know if they're treading into territory that isn't popular. It doesn't mean they won't do it. And I think this comes about right now when he wants to recognize Israel, but according to a US poll of Saudi, 90+% of Saudis don't want to recognize Israel. So it could be hazardous for a ruler that chose to do so. I think a Saudi ruler, the crown prince, can do what they want to, but they're aware that they have to deal with the fallout of that. And so having said that he wouldn't recognize Israel without the creation of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, he told the Saudi Shura Council that in, I guess, September of 24, I believe. Um, for him to suddenly change on that, I think he has to be careful about doing that. I mean, the old founder Abdulaziz, I mean, they rule by a combination of um, brutality to intimidate people and what you might call bribes or handouts. If you if you do what I want, you get this. If you don't, you could get that. I mean, there's the famous story of Abdulaziz building the gallows and hanging 18 of 19, or not hanging, chopping off, having the heads chopped off of 18 of 19 people, and then releasing the last one and saying, "Go tell about the justice of Abdulaziz." So it's part intimidation and part giving people what they want. So
Or I
young,
guess co-opting in some cases, yeah,
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
co-opting people who might have been uh, critics or
yeah.
problematic for them. Uh,
Hmm.
oh, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about class and Vision 2030. I mean, this is again one of the questions that I'm always kind of fascinated by and interested in is, to what extent do these changes that are happening in Saudi Arabia, which are, very visible and undeniable, extend and transcend social and economic class, and to what extent are they experienced unevenly? I think for me, one of the most interesting kind of Saudi works of art to come out in the past few years was a film called Night Career, or Mandub, which is actually, you can see it on Netflix now, I think. And it's basically an examination of class and Vision 2030 and sort of the ways in which some Saudis are being maybe left behind. There's one of the characters is this aspiring but pretty unsuccessful entrepreneur, which is interesting when you think about the ways in which MBS has really emphasized entrepreneurship as a way forward for Saudis. Another character ends up kind of falling into this underworld of criminality in Riyadh. I guess, I'm curious how you view this issue in your visits to the kingdom. How much do you think that this transformation goes really deep through different classes, and how much is it still something that's more experienced by the upper class?
I mean, I'm sure it's more experienced by the upper class, but what intrigues me now is that you can meet young Saudis who are willing to do work that they would have never done in the past. Um, Women who are working in a restaurant, waiting tables, or seating people. I mean, Saudis never wanted to do that kind of work. I remember 20 years ago having a meal with a Saudi who had gone to Harvard and he said, I went to a restaurant last night and a Saudi waited on me. I was so embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. Now, I couldn't understand that until, I mean, I'm not embarrassed to have an American wait on me at a restaurant or anyone else. But, Saudis just didn't want to do normal menial jobs. And now, if you go to Al Ula, there are a lot of females tour guides. So they're free to take men around and educate them on the scenes. Um, they're willing to do it. They're proud to do it. They talk about, I want to be part of Vision 2030. Um, and I think, for a lot of them, that's very sincere. They see this opportunity to help lift themselves and the country. There are clearly people who are remain very poor and who have a hard time um, getting access to things. The government has set up all kinds of programs to help women and other people start a business, but it's starting a business and making it successful are two different things. So I think the public still has a lot of learning to do.
Yeah, and I think, historically in Saudi Arabia, a lot of people who would call themselves entrepreneurs, or appear to be entrepreneurs, do have quite a lot of family wealth as well. And so it's sometimes, I feel like when you look at these incentives in the marketplace, you see a certain cafe, for example, is very, very successful. But then perhaps they're actually losing money, right? It's like a passion project for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, yeah, it does make it sort of an interesting landscape. A lot of that wealth, as you write about, a lot of that wealth was pretty hidden before. And now society is sort of coming out from the walls and everybody is seeing everybody else and what everybody else is doing. That's having an interesting effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just remember being shocked to learn again 20 years ago that 40% of Saudis lived below the poverty line. And supposedly it's not that bad now, but it's very hard you know, to know. I mean, I made a point of going to see poor people for that first book. And, many of them were women, not surprisingly, whose husbands were in prison or whose husbands had divorced them, and there were just no options for them. And the wealthy class have their own connections with princes and other people. And I think one of the things the crown prince has tried to do when he jailed the royals and key business people in the Ritz was to break up that um, connection of taking money from the state and putting it in your own pocket. I was told that something like 30% of the Saudi budget did not actually go where it was supposed to. It went into corruption in one person's pocket or another and passed on. He is trying to limit the corruption. I'm sure there is still a lot, but they are actually arresting people now. You don't know whether the arrests are because the powers that be are unhappy with somebody, or whether that somebody is indeed involved in, corruption. But there are prominent arrests and not so prominent arrests, and there was almost none of that in the preceding administration. I mean,
Right.
you have a particular, if you will, view. I mean, as you said, you don't have my 35 previous years ahead of 2015 or so, but you said you came there in 2015 to literally the 10 years from, was King Abdullah alive when you came?
I came after the transition, yeah. But of course, MBS was still not super well known. I
Yeah,
think there was a building in Riyadh that had just sort of started to fill up with consultants, and they were talking about something called the National Transformation Program, and that's kind
yeah,
of when I arrived.
hmm
So
yeah. So you've seen most of this change.
definitely seen quite a lot of change. Yeah, I think, as you know, the past 10 years have been pretty dramatic, on a lot of different levels. I did want
You
to ask a
you
bit
never
about.
you never encountered the religious police, right?
Oh, I did.
Did
Yes, I did. Yeah, no, they were still around. Yeah. I
in
mean, and they are
2015.
as they are still around, but they're like defanged essentially, right?
Yeah.
Their role is a
So
bit
they exist,
unclear.
but they can't arrest you. So,
Yes.
you
So
know,
what
they're
are they
they're
really? Yeah, yeah.
they're being paid, so they remain quiescent, but they don't come out and, I mean, I was once with my Saudi translator in the Faisaliya hotel, and the religious police walked in and said, "Cover your head," in perfect English to me. "Cover your head. You're in Saudi Arabia." And demanded my passport and his identity card, and sent me, I put my scarf up over my head because I always wear it around my neck to be secure if I need it. But, that kind of thing, I don't think happens anymore. At least I haven't.
Not really. No, yeah. I mean, the religious police they're much less visible now. They have like a TikTok and a, Snapchat account that they sort of do various promotions on. I encourage people to look those up because they're pretty interesting. But no, they're not in the streets in the same way that they were 2015, 2016, and prior to that. They really aren't. You will still occasionally see, I guess, what Saudis would call like muhtasibin, or just like, very conservative individuals who might say something to you. And I've had that happen in the past few years, but it's not very common now. No. And I did want to ask a bit about, of course, human rights and all of these, arrests that have happened in this pretty extensive crackdown that's gone on at the same time. And, you sort of wrote about, you said after arresting between 6,000 and 7,000 individuals for social media violations over half a dozen years, the government quietly began to release them in 2025. And when I asked an official why this decision wasn't announced, he said, "Actions speak louder than words." So there's been quite a lot of people released recently who had been arrested in what most of us would probably view as political, cases. Do you have any sense of why they have begun to release people? Do you think this is an initiative that's going to continue? What is the motivation? I think it's been something that a lot of people on the ground here are quite confused about.
Yeah, I assume that, I mean, people have told me for a couple of years that there are going to be some judicial reforms that, we're going to wait till it's all worked out to announce. But I think, the Khashoggi murder is far enough in the past, and that the Crown Prince has, is finding it easier to be a a friend of Trump and better relations in the U.S., et cetera. I'm assuming that he wants to come here. And so I think, getting clearing some of the most visible underbrush of arrests is helps the embassy here, helps the government there be able to point to some improvements in human rights and to focus on the fact that it's just bad people that they're locking up, as opposed to locking up someone who tweets something and has nine, nine followers. So in essence, it fell in the forest, the tree did, and nobody heard it. But he still wound up arrested. So I I don't know if it's part of a bigger campaign, but I think they are constantly trying to calibrate. It's the reason they want to know, as we were discussing earlier, what do polls show? I mean, if we're too repressive, you let up a little if you can. It's the constant uh, calibration to keep things steady.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What do you think are the main challenges that MBS is facing today, in this moment?
Um, Having the money and expertise available to con to see his big projects through to fruition. So one of them is money, because oil prices haven't been as high as they need. They're now in the sort of $60 range, I think 65, and the kingdom needs about $95 a barrel to make its budget balance. And the other is he wants to have relations with Israel so that he can develop Neom into a modern Silicon Valley with a lot of AI data centers, Israeli technology, Saudi money, creating jobs for young Saudis there. And it's part of his very positive vision of trying to have a Middle East that is peaceful and prosperous. That is something that's managed to elude the Middle East for thousands of years. So it probably will continue to elude the Middle East, but he has a vision for trying to work with Israel, and he has to find a way to get around the Palestinian issue, because the Israelis seem more bent than ever, or at least the Netanyahu government, but more generally, Israelis against having a Palestinian state, because they feel that it would be detrimental to their security. So I don't know how he can square that conflict between his insisting on some kind of Palestinian state and the Israelis insisting on no Palestinian state. But I think both Israel and Saudi Arabia would like to improve their relationship. So, and Trump clearly wants that, as you heard Trump when he was in the kingdom saying, I want this to happen, but the crown prince will do it in his own time, which I think was a way of, if the crown prince can find a way to do it, it won't appear that he's doing the bidding of America, which is never particularly popular in Saudi Arabia, that they want their leaders to do their own thing, not what the Americans demand of them. So I think, money and then the third is protecting what he has created. All of these projects are in various states of completion, and some of them in trouble, like the line that supposed to be 105-mile city, which is now going to be only a mile and a half completed by 2030, because it costs so much and it's been so difficult to do. But he needs to protect all of that from Iranians, and he succeeded in this last war of no strikes from the Houthis or from Iran occurred, and he has to protect his oil and the money he has spent, oil money is spent on these big projects, because as one Saudi prince said to me, we won't be able to do it over. If this doesn't work, the kingdom will be in trouble.
Did you ask him at all about succession? Like who comes after him?
I didn't. I should have, but it's more timely now, given the age of his father. Everybody, I have a chapter in the book that basically talks about the Salman line, that the kingship has passed from, since the old man then founded the kingdom in 1932, from him to various of his sons. And now those boys are all very, very old. There are two more, I think, alive besides King Salman. But the idea is clearly to forget going from brother to brother, or bringing in their children and try to create a line from King Salman to MBS to whom is the question Saudis want to know. And some people, I haven't asked you, because it's really a fool's errand to try to guess who the leadership is going to be. Somebody told me, first time I ever went to Saudi Arabia, I think, and I asked something about that. Those who talk don't know, and those who know don't talk. But his son is now 15. And if you assume that King Salman who's going to be 90 in December, Abdullah died at 90, that, we're looking at MBS becoming king in I would say, the next 12 to 18 months. He needs a crown prince. There is no deputy crown prince right now, which is interesting to me that he has not chosen to name a deputy. I think it's probably because he doesn't have to, and it leaves all options open. So why do it, even though you can name one and then remove them later? So I don't know. Some people say he'll name his brother, the defense minister. Others say one of the cousins. But I have no idea. But I think you can't be king and not have a crown prince, because the whole purpose of a crown prince is to be the king in waiting. And MBS has been much more than that. But you can't risk dying and leaving the country with no clear, quick successor.
Yeah, or like an Oman situation. I don't think that would fly for Saudi Arabia. Have that much lack of clarity. So I think we're coming into the questions portion now. We have some interesting questions coming in, but just a reminder that if anyone has a question, you can submit it at askac.org. I want to start with a question from Alex Nugdy, who says, is there anything that you see MBS breaking away from Saudi public opinion on?
Breaking away from Saudi public opinion. No, I would say, as I've already said, that most of the young people are totally in sync with what he is doing. There are clearly still religious and royal opponents, and I hear from religious conservatives saying, you should not talk about progress by women working in public offices with men. I don't want my wife working alongside strange men. So, there are still people that have a very conservative view. I lived for the first book with a very conservative woman, and her husband picked us up once at her sister's house, but because I was a woman he wasn't related to, I was not introduced to him. I mean, it was like I did not exist. I sat in the car right behind him. He did not say a word to me. I obviously did not say a word to him. They went right on talking as if I didn't exist. It's it's strange, or to go see someone with my Saudi male translator, and the person's wife produces dinner and puts it on the table and knocks on the door and runs because she can't be seen by my translator, who is a man she's unrelated to. Um, Much of that kind of stuff has ended, but there are still people who practice it. But I think he's largely in sync with the majority of the population, which is young.
I do want to ask, I mean, as a follow-up to that, how do we know that? I guess I always struggle with that because, how do we know actually
Yeah.
what the majority does think?
Well, the young people that I talk to, by and large, it's not like they're 100% supportive, but they are supportive of the openness of the entertainment, of the desire to get the country off of oil so that they have a way to make a living on into the future when oil is not there. Uh, there are some young people I've talked to, but I would say more in the 40 range, which I regard as young, but um, uh, who say, who don't like, they want Saudi Arabia to be the Islamic guiding light in the world. And they believe, like the Wahhabis that controlled the country did, that you must not think about today. You must think about the afterlife. You must focus on Allah and on what you can do to get yourself closer to God, to Allah, and to getting yourself to paradise in the afterlife. But the present life is just something you must get through. You don't need to worry about rich, poor. You just need to worry about, am I a good Muslim? And the country is still, I would say, very conservative um, and religious. And maybe there are more people that have that view that don't say it um, to me anymore. As you ask earlier, how do you know what's marketing and what's real? I mean, one is constantly trying to, like you are now, figure that out. You have to listen, talk to more people. And, so when I say the majority, I mean, I cannot cite a poll. There are Saudi organizations that do polling, but what I learned from them was dates to 2018. So it may not be, probably isn't exactly up to speed.
Yeah, and of course it gets quite complicated to even how do you interpret poll results when people are worried about might be worried about voicing their, true opinions. It's very hard to parse.
Yeah, that's to me the hard part, even if you've got a poll. I mean, what does it mean? Do people really tell some pollster they don't know what they think? Most Saudis, I would say, don't. I mean, I discovered that you can get one view from a Saudi when you're alone with the person, and quite a different view from that Saudi when he is in a group of other people. Um, so, knowing exactly what Saudis think is a tenuous task.
Yeah, no, and of course I've had that same experience where over, however many years or months of knowing someone, the more intimate you get, the more what they say changes, and you wonder what they said in public, was that, ever what they really thought. Yeah, it's quite a difficult task. And of course, that's both sociocultural and also a factor of authoritarianism, right? They're worried about voicing their true opinion if there isn't a real trust and privacy factor. One other question that's very interesting to me, and I'm curious what you'll say, is it's from Noor Dabusi, beyond the headlines about mega projects and social reform. So putting aside, we talk a lot about the social reforms, things like NEOM. What underreported change in the kingdom do you think will have the most lasting impact?
Beyond mega projects and social
reform. So putting aside the mega projects and the social change, what is one or two, kind of underreported changes that are actually quite impactful?
I think the most impactful change, and it's underreported and probably impossible to report, is the one we were discussing. What is the real what is the real view on Saudi needs to be, what kind of religious example does Saudi Arabia want to be? Does it want to be the moderate Islam that influences the world through its devotion to Allah, but its moderation in the way it lives its lives? If that becomes the norm, it would have, I think, huge impact for the world and certainly for the US, because it would undermine the terrorist instinct. And we continue to be one of the key targets for terrorists. So if Saudi Arabia becomes a model of moderate Islam, that would be very significant. If people begin, as they get more of what they want, to become more determined to be devout and deeply religious. I do not equate religion with terrorism. I want to make that clear. Just because you're religious doesn't mean you support terrorism. I mean, I'm from a tiny town in Texas where, not unlike Saudi Arabia, my father allowed no shorts, no pants, no TV, no telephone, no alcohol, no dating. He would have been a perfectly good Saudi father. And the only thing there was to do in the town of 900 people went to one of 5 churches. So, but there are Saudis who do equate devotion to Allah to killing infidels. And that's the part that if one can cut out and have an Islam that is big on devotion to Allah and conservative living. Um, as I think right now, a lot of Saudis are, they're not all dying to go get drunk. It's not a, um, I think if they can have, I'm sorry to repeat myself, a moderate Islam, it would be incredibly significant. But knowing exactly where where people's minds are and where their minds might be going on this issue is very hard for an outsider to know, or I think it is. I assume that is your experience too, Vivian, that you don't feel like.
I think it's always very hard to parse people's views of religion and particularly Islam here and in general. I mean, I think I do remember when, the Crown Prince kind of came on stage at one of the future investment initiatives and made that grand pronouncement of, we're going to be following a moderate Islam, open to the world and
Mm,
all religions. It was a pronouncement that a lot of people I spoke to in Saudi found very interesting, but also that they didn't quite understand what that meant. And I think that's kind of part of the point of it, right? It's a very vague phrase. What does moderate Islam mean? In moderate in which way? Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think he so far the government has kept it quite vague. I don't think it's really been clear entirely what they mean by that. There's been sort of some discussion of perhaps creating an institute that would talk about review a hadith or the sayings of the prophet and kind of reclassify them maybe, but then we didn't hear that much about that in the end. So the actual kind of nitty-gritties of what are the teachings that Saudi Arabia as a state is now professing, I think it's sometimes a bit unclear. Perhaps strategically unclear and perhaps just unclear.
mm. Yeah, I think, the Crown Prince says that in essence, the Wahhabis distorted Islam, and that the prophet's time the prophet was decent to Jews. He also had fights. So Islam has a history that you can pick different parts of it to justify what you wish. But I think he is right that um, the prophet's wives certainly had it uh, better than Saudi women in some of the period here pre um, pre MBS's reforms.
Yeah. There's kind of here's another question that is interesting. I want to get a couple more in before we end. How would you say MBS compares to the other big regional leaders who also have a large presence, like Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE or the Emir of Qatar?
Um, I cannot, I do not know them personally. I think, what his view is that he is representing a truly big, serious country. They are representing 175,000, population, kind of, that these are little countries with a lot of money. But they don't really, in his mind, compete with Saudi Arabia. And obviously, it is true, I think, that it is far harder to run and make a success of Saudi Arabia than to make a success of the UAE or Dubai or these little entities that truly don't have much native population. It's all foreigners there doing the work and earning money. Qatar, Bahrain.
Yeah, they're very different states and are in a lot of ways predicated on having much smaller local populations. And it's a lot harder to translate that, I guess, to a country like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, if he does wind up being willing to recognize Israel, it will be a different level of recognition than what came with those countries. Sorry, you were going to ask another question.
No, that's interesting as well. Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, it's still in the news all the time. Will they, won't they? And when will they or won't they? Yeah, I mean, so I guess this is a pretty large global question, but it's an important one. From Winnie Zhang. Do you think that Saudi Vision 2030 will be accomplished?
Uh, I think it's 60-40 that, he's got things going, but the real test is not the past 10 years, it's the next 10 years. Can he see these things through and actually make them not just a vision and some construction, but completed projects that produce jobs and put Saudi Arabia where he says it will be, where he wants to be in the top 5 G20 economies. I mean, it has moved, I think, from number 17 to number 15. But, that's still quite a ways from top 5. And that's still quite a ways from being part of, going to Mars and, the moon and the various things that he has in mind. So I think the issue of is he a dreamer um, or is he a doer? It's clear he's a dreamer, and it from the first 10 years that he really has ideas that others have not uh, championed for Saudi Arabia. But is he a doer that gets them done? He still seems to be totally confident that he can. And I don't say he can't. I just think you have to wait. We have to watch him over the next 10 years to see whether it's successful.
Right. And I think you made a very important point in the book when you talked about how much more challenging, or in early phases rather, the economic changes are compared to the social changes.
Hmm hmm Yeah, the social changes are easy to do, let people dance in the streets and the economic changes are more difficult. And whether you can get the foreign help you need without freeing up the political system a bit, I think is an open question too. That they do need foreign money and um, Western or other expertise. And will people come if they can't express their mind or if they feel nervous that if they do, they could, wind up being incarcerated for it? I mean, it's what China's doing to people that's making its progress harder.
Yeah. I mean, the UAE is an interesting counterpoint to that, right? Of course, I guess, because the UAE has been very successful at attracting foreigners, but certainly does not offer any freedom of speech for those
Hmm
foreigners.
hmm
But
hmm
yeah, I mean, obviously, as we said before, though, Saudi Arabia is going to have to follow a very different path.
Yeah.
Great. And do you have any closing remarks, any final thoughts that you want to share?
Just that I think I tried also to compare him to, other leaders who had a long runway. If MBS will be 40, I think, this next month, um, he could be a ruler for the next 50 years. And while he is far from perfect, I think the kingdom benefits from having someone that actually tries to move it out of the kind of sclerotic position it has been in for several decades. So I think it's certainly in the U.S. interest to try to encourage and help the economic transformation and continue to encourage more political freedom.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.